Kristin, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about AI and automation. I know you are super, super busy, both with the success of ScaleHouse and being at the helm of Esomar. AI and automation is the title of the session. What do these terms mean to you?
Well, it's interesting to me because I think that oftentimes they're used interchangeably. Automation to me is a process versus AI to me, which is more of a technology. So we've been doing automation since I started out in research, which I think was in 1996. When I think of automation, I think of what are all the different technology solutions that make our lives easier as researchers. And when I think of AI, I think of artificial intelligence, which is where there is a programming component and is creating a process that is obviously being influenced by whoever's doing the programming. And of course, I've written extensively, I think, about bias in AI and how to avoid it, or what are the challenges, particularly for our industry, around it. But I don't think that automation and AI are two interchangeable terms.
Yeah,
I think they're two very distinct. Well, one's a practice and one's a technology.
Absolutely. So, how do you think this practice and technology are impacting market research at the moment? So you get a global picture of it from the inside and the outside.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's, in many cases, I think it helped many firms this last year who, and particularly traditional research firms that suffered quite a blow financially from the pandemic, and who I think were, in some cases, and particularly on the qualitative side of the business, and this is not to pick on qualitative because I love qualies, and I think, traditional qualitative research is necessary and a real asset to our industry. But I do think, in many cases, qualitative was lagging in terms of adopting technology, which includes a lot of the automation processes that we saw really jump forward last year. So I think originally, and I believe it was about a 22% downturn that Esomar had predicted for last year when COVID hit. But because we saw about a 9% growth across the digital and tech-enabled segments, which includes, automation and AI solutions, that overall industry downturn was, significantly less than what we expected. And it, I think it really did fuel what we're seeing as kind of the industry's revolution. It's accelerating these really dynamic shifts that we were already seeing, and I think also creating this increasing divide between digital or technology focused segments and the established market research segments.
So just to push that point a little bit further, what are we seeing in terms of valuations between companies that are using this tech and companies that are not?
Yeah, I mean, tech valuations have been higher for years, and I think that, that's not just a result of technology, and this is kind of a drum I beat for services-based companies. I think there's this misnomer that if you're a full-service research firm that doesn't have a technology solution, that you can't achieve a high valuation. I don't think that's the case. I think that tech firms tend to get higher valuations because they have recurring revenue streams, which is an area where traditional research firms have struggled to produce those types of outcomes, to produce, ongoing or recurring revenue. That said, I will say, because of recurring revenue streams and the value of tech, 2020, we saw private equity and venture capital firms invest in the industry at levels that we had not seen since, quote, the kind of big data surge of 2014. And there was a particular focus on technology transformation and mergers. And you can kind of see that not only from the types of firms that were raising money, so like Quantilope, if you're familiar with them, early stage analytics firm, they raised $28 million US dollars last July. I mean, that was right in the middle of COVID. And then, we saw, Qualtrics, mind-boggling $27.3 billion IPO. Cint recently had their IPO on the Swedish NASDAQ at a 1.21 billion valuation. So, certainly if you look at where the investment money is going, a lot of it is going in data collection or technology platforms, but there was also, some 600 million that was invested in market research related enterprises, most of which was in analytics and specifically customer analytics.
Certainly an enormous number of transactions and investments going on at the moment. Flipping to the other side of the industry, what's the implication of all of this for clients? What's changing for clients?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think clients are being challenged to gain a deeper understanding of not just primary research data, but of all the different types of data that are available to them. And I think a really great example of this is a conversation that I had with Pavi Gupta at Johnson & Johnson when he and I were both up for Esomar elections. And Pavi just did this great presentation at TMRE at home on behalf of Esomar, which he called The Power of And Pavi and I were having a kind of a conversation about what some of his key challenges were at Johnson & Johnson. And he relayed this story, which I thought was really fascinating, which was, a year or so ago, the CMO of Johnson & Johnson came in his office and said, hey, I got the results of the latest research study, but what about, using point of sale data, or where was the Salesforce data? And, Pavi looked at him and said, well, I do primary research. I'm a researcher and I don't use those data sets. And then the CMO left his office and Pavi said, when I realized, I wasn't going to have a job in 12 months if I didn't figure out how to use these, these other types of data streams in order to provide a more holistic understanding of, what consumer sentiment or, consumer buying habits are. And if you can, I don't know if TMRE has a recording of his presentation, but he's working with firms like Graphene to leverage AI to establish baseline metrics. He's using lots of different tools and techniques. And I think that this is if I was ever going to advocate for lifelong learning, this would be a great example of it. Somebody who's really in the prime of his career and is having to learn how to use a lot of different new tools and techniques in order to, to get a broader picture of what is going on with his buyers.
And again, flipping, so if we were to think about a traditional market research agency, what sort of things do you think they should be doing? Somebody who doesn't see themselves as a tech-enabled agency, I mean, obviously they'll be using tech, but if they're behind the curve, where might be some good starting points, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Ray, I'm a huge proponent for partnerships and integrations. And I think that fortunately, I think one of the great things that came out of COVID was that I think there were some traditional firms that had been very reluctant to partner and collaborate in the past that then realized that they really had to if they were going to survive 2020. And so partnerships, collaborations, API integrations, all of those things I think are really valuable for full service research firms because because there are so many great technologies now, it almost always makes more sense to buy than it does to build. Realize what your strengths are as a full service firm. From my perspective, full service firms, where their value lies is in design and analytics, not necessarily in the data collection components, not in, creating custom or proprietary technologies. It's really in the research design and then producing the best possible outcomes using whatever data sets you need to in order to produce that. And so that, that to me is one area where full service research firms, I think maybe out of nervousness of working with types of data that they're less comfortable with, or not understanding where to access that data have lagged a bit. And then I also think that there's huge power in not just being a research generalist, but figuring out what you're really good at and doubling down on those strengths. I think, if you're a big firm like a Kantar or an Ipsos, yeah, you can be more of a generalist. You can be all things to all people because you're big enough to do those. But for most mid-market and smaller firms, they really need to figure out what it is, what's their special sauce, what do they do different and special and better than anybody else, and really differentiate themselves based on that rather than trying to be all things to all people.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. So people sometimes will say to me, you know what, that AI system, that automation system, whatever, it's not as good as the best research you can buy. It's not, but it tends to be better than about 30 to 40%. So you really don't want to be in that ordinary space. As you say, you need a special sauce. You need a special.
Yes, at least I don't want to be in the ordinary space.
You're not. You're definitely not in the
Yeah.
ordinary space, Kristin.
Yeah. And I think that when you look at industry trends, where the investment money is going, where buyers are spending their money, it's not in traditional full service research. Those are not the growth areas. Traditional market research has been flat or in decline for years now. And you can see that from looking at Esomar's GMR data. So, yes, if you're a big firm, you can grow through acquisition and you can show growth year over year, but you're not showing organic growth. And if you want to show organic growth as a traditional full service firm, then you've got to figure out what it is that makes you special and different, and also figure out ways that you can partner and collaborate with other firms to stay ahead of the curve from a technology perspective.
So I've got one more question, and then we'll dive in to see what people have been putting in the chat stream as questions. But
okay.
Again, changing our focus now. Imagine that you're talking to a young researcher, perhaps 25 years old, 2 years experience in market research. They like the business, they like the people. What would you suggest they focus on?
From my perspective, analytics, for sure. I think and I think, I think there's two issues that we have as an industry. I mean, one is that so much of the analytics has become automated now that as a skill set, analysis is, at least for folks that have been in the industry for some time, is becoming less of a differentiator. I think that anytime somebody asks me if I was going to, put my money somewhere in the industry, where would it be? It would absolutely be in analytics, because that's the power of researchers, and that's what makes us special and different, is our analytical skills. But not just analyzing primary research data. It's almost like taking more of a business intelligence approach to it, which is trying to look at a business more holistically rather than look at it on a project by project basis, which is what we have a tendency to do in market research. And this is one of the reasons why I think Alex Gellman, who's the former CEO of MTAB, he came out of McKinsey and he wrote a really great presentation a few years ago about why big consulting is eating market research for lunch. And it was about, the fact that we have a tendency not to strategically look at everything that's going on in the business. And so I would say, understand business finance and, the triggers that drive growth in a business. I think, I think it was at Esomar. I can't remember the name, and you might remember this, Ray. There was a really great keynote at Esomar in Edinburgh 2 years ago. And he had just written a book. And I think it was like, the title something like, Think Like a CFO and Act Like a CMO. Wasn't that the title?
It was, yes. It was something like Think Like a CFO.
And that's what I really encourage people to do, is like, that might be counterintuitive to some people, and particularly like for me, I certainly didn't get a degree in business finance. I went on to learn a lot about business finance the hard way when I started my own companies, but I think one of the most valuable skill sets that a young researcher could develop would be really good analytical skills, and B, really good business finance skills, because I think that that allows you to understand what are the triggers that actually drive business growth. And that to me is invaluable from an analytical standpoint.
Thanks, that's great. So just looking here at the stream, and there's one that links so closely to what you've just been saying. So based on the J&J example, would you think there should be more focus on decision intelligence systems utilizing traditional market research data augmented by other sources such as transactions, and build one version of truth for the decision making?
I have to tell you, Ray, I apologize to whoever asked this question, but I really hate that one source of truth statement. And I hate it only because it seems like every research company in the world right now is using this one source of truth. Like, I don't think there's one source of truth. I think there's, I think that there are many opportunities to look at different data streams to figure out what the best path forward is. I try to steer away from that truth commentary, just because to me it feels like marketing speak, and marketing speak makes me a little twitchy when it comes to practical skill sets.
I agree entirely with you. So let's go back to the rest of the statement about this.
Okay.
Utilizing traditional market research augmented with other sources of transactions.
Yes.
To build an integrated view.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes, absolutely. That is where I believe the industry not only should go, but needs to go. 100%. I don't, I'm not saying that there is not value in traditional primary market research. There absolutely is. It's just when that's the only thing that you're using, I think that you're missing out on a lot of consumer insight.
So what do you think the most significant pain point that the industry needs to solve?
The most significant pain point, I think, is getting comfortable working with non-primary research data sets, 100%. And I think that's why when we see folks that are coming into the industry that are more data science folks, maybe they're coming from data as a service companies, maybe they're coming out of business intelligence. I mean, I think one of the key objectives that we have at Esomar, which we also had, during the term, Ray, where we served on council together, was, how do we become more inclusive at Esomar such that we are attracting data scientists and BI people and data as a service companies, not just from a skill set perspective, but also from a data ethics perspective, which I think is something that we often overlook. I mean, there's two sides to the using alternative data sets coin. One is, we're getting all this great information, but the second question becomes then, but are we collecting it in an ethical way? And are we compensating people correctly for it? And there's a fine line between marketing and market research. And we need to, we need to be aware of it, and B, one of the benefits of inviting folks from those industries into our associations is that they then understand the importance of the difference between marketing and market research.
So we've had a shout out from Finn, actually. So it was Chris van Bergrave in Edinburgh. Think like a CFO, present like a CMO.
Yeah. Oh, that was such a good keynote. Thanks, Finn.
We have this point that Simon Chadwick would make fairly frequently as well. We need to be more like consultants, incorporating survey and non-survey experiences. That's something presumably you'd summarize as being fine.
I would agree with Simon on that. It's very rare that Simon and I disagree, by the way. Yeah, we communicate regularly, and I think we see pretty eye to eye on it. The consultative part is hard, I think, for a lot of researchers, because we for so many years have often functioned as order takers and worked on a project by project basis versus understanding, and again, this requires you having some business experience and a business background, is understanding how research relates to the overall health and growth of a business. And that's a deeper conversation. And I think, unfortunately, many times the folks that are running projects or are having the day-to-day client contact are not having those more strategic conversations, and that, you know, that's problematic for us as an industry.
We're almost out of time, but there was a quick factual question. You said that J&J used Graphene to leverage metrics.
Yes.
Could you outline what that is?
You know, to be honest, I haven't looked into Graphene since I saw Pavi's presentation. It was included in his presentation, and my understanding is that he's using Graphene to leverage AI to establish baseline metrics for his consumer base. But unfortunately, I don't have any other information about Graphene. It's actually on my very long list of technologies to dig into and to learn more about. So if anybody on this call hasn't heard of them either, I would encourage you to do the same.
Excellent. Well, we've still got several questions, so I'm sure if you were to reach out to Kristin on social, she would be more than delighted to engage with you. And I'm kind of think there's one more thing that our 25-year-old young researcher can do, and that's join Esomar as a young member. They get a discount.
A huge discount. I think it's 100 euros to join versus, you know, I think it's around 370 and change. Yeah, I will say, and I'm not saying this just because I'm Esomar president, but also because I've been a member for 11 years now. It has fundamentally been the biggest catalyst in the growth of my career. I would not have traveled as much internationally. I would not be spending almost half the year living overseas. I would not have access to the same technologies and connections that I do, and I in no way would have learned everything that I needed to learn had I, you know, just been part of an association in the US and stayed in the US. I think that there's so much we can learn from people in other parts of the world. I mean, I think I've said this multiple times on multiple stages and in multiple presentations, but, you know, one of my favorite tracks at Esomar Congress every year is the Esomar Foundation track, because it's all about doing research for NGOs in like some of the most challenging areas of the world. And when you see the types of technologies and the ways that they're doing research, to me, that is such an eye-opener. And so if you love learning about new ways of conducting research and connecting with people all over the world, I really cannot stress enough, the important role that Esomar plays in our industry in terms of making those connections. I mean, Ray, I don't think you and I would have met.
No. I mean, I would echo everything you said, except I've been doing it even longer. Kristin, thank you so much for your time. That's been fantastic.
My pleasure.